So today we have another regenerative finance lab here in the design school, and I am very excited to pick a topic that actually could change the world. I feel like what I'm going to share today, if enough of us could get this story out, we could hack that $900 billion per year that's wasted on carbon markets. Wasted, almost all of it. I'd say probably 80 or 90% of it's wasted, especially considering the opportunity cost of what it could be invested in instead. And I want to just briefly say that today I'm going to be sharing some of what I would reveal in a frame analysis, but I'm not going to present it as a frame analysis, which is to say, it's my understanding of cognitive linguistics that makes it really easy for me to see the patterns I'm going to share with you today. And I have a pretty deep understanding of why these concepts are so devastating, why they're able to do so much destruction by keeping the climate discourse, and I would say the environmental movement writ large, mostly captured in a reactionary pattern of accepting the frames of their enemy and then advocating their enemy's agenda, which is that carbon markets are entirely neoliberal capitalism. And they have very, very important conceptual pillars that make it basically impossible to get out of that neoliberal capitalist thinking, which means you can't ever truly be regenerative when you're stuck in those ideas, because those are reality denying concepts. They're concepts that make it so that if you hold those concepts, you cannot see reality. They get in the way. And just one little comment, something that my former mentor, George Lakoff, would point out, and it's a statistic he'd gotten from Daniel Kahneman and a few cognitive neuroscientists, is that there are a lot of different estimates in brain research that tell us that something like 98% of the information processing to construct our thoughts happens in parts of our brains and bodies that we can never have conscious access to. So I just want to name that almost all of the structuring of your thoughts is impossible to directly introspect about. And just as a simple example, you have no conscious awareness of photons hitting your retinas in your visual cortex, just as an example. That there's a lot of information processing that is impossible to access through conscious introspection. So we have to analyze human thought patterns to see how we're being misled. And you're going to see some of that today with carbon offsets. And so I also want to just name a little bit of history, as I was commenting on at the very beginning, that in 1987, there was the first congressional hearing on global warming that happened in the US Congress. And it was around that time that the Cato Institute and the Rand Corporation, two core pillars of the military-industrial complex that is entirely based on fossil fuels, that they started constructing a rational management framework for global warming to try to capture the discourse, to get everyone thinking in terms of reductionistic market mechanisms using neoliberal logic. And you're going to see today that carbon markets are the perfect embodiment of that. And we need to undo it. So there's a bit of that sort of like deeper philosophical strategic part, but also there's a very practical thing I'm going to share with you today, is not only have I been able to deconstruct this discourse, we've actually created the alternative and we're practicing it and it's working, which is to say we actually know what to do with this one. And so what I hope to share with you today is how you can tell the stories in your own bioregional organizing to attract some of those billions of dollars in the carbon markets to do something that actually does good. So that's like the context of today. Pretty exciting, huh? So I'm going to go ahead and share screen. As usual, we'll have plenty of time for discussion afterwards. But I want to go ahead and jump in because I feel like this one is going to be a good one. So let me get this out of my way and get that out of the way. And here we go. So the topic today is beyond carbon offsets, flowing value into real human relationships. So you can already get a feel for where we're needing to go. So I want to start just by being sure everyone knows what carbon offsets are, because it's a pretty simple idea. It works like this. A carbon offset is that someone emits carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. They pay for the same amount of carbon to be stored in the earth, so they pay money for the carbon that they emitted rather than reducing it themselves. And then someone else receives this money and makes sure the carbon storage takes place. So they might plant trees or they might do something else, but they're being sure the carbon is being sequestered or captured by the Earth system and not being held in the atmosphere. Note how these people who are paying for these carbon offsets usually don't know the people that they're selling them to. They don't know each other. So there's an anonymity, and the primary concern is a matter of accounting. Also notice that it's all about carbon. It's not about biodiversity loss. It's not about intact ecosystems. It's not about social justice. It's not about indigenous land rights. It's not about a bunch of other things. It's only about carbon. That is on purpose. So what's wrong with carbon offsets with this seemingly simple idea? Well, there are a lot of people who talk about the problem of verification, which is how do you know that the carbon is being offset? Did someone really plant trees? Did those trees really capture carbon? What's going to happen in 10 years? What's going to happen in 20 years? See, this problem of verification is a research problem and a reporting problem, and it's a really serious one. So most people spend their time criticizing carbon offsets because there's this challenge of verifying for sure that carbon was actually captured and stored. But there are many, many other problems, and I'm not even going to name all of them. I'm just going to name some of the big ones. One of them is the problem of carbon myopia, which is that you get yourself focused on carbon dioxide molecules and you forget to look at holistic systems. So you don't look at biodiversity loss, you don't look at the permafrost melting, you don't look at ecosystem destruction, you don't look at land consolidation, you don't look at corporate land grabs, you don't look at fossil fuel companies paying lobbyists to buy political outcomes, you don't look at a whole bunch of other things because you're too busy counting carbon. Then another problem is the problem of commodities, which is that you've now taken an incredibly complex problem and you've commodified it. You've mass produced it. And we'll go into these a little bit more in a moment. But you've basically turned the entire global warming discourse into a commodities market, something you can buy and sell for equal value. And the unit of measure is tons of carbon. So a ton of carbon is the commodity. Then there's the problem of anonymity, which is it's anonymous. There's no trust. There's no necessary relationships. I can buy carbon offsets and someone on the market is going to sell the offsets and someone else may be the one who plants the trees and someone else may verify. And anonymity is that you don't have actual relationships where people know each other as part of the way that the market works. Then you have the problem of reductionism, that you've taken incredibly complex things and you've oversimplified them to make them technocratic and reductionistic. And then there's the problem of market logic, which is you now make all environmental problems things that markets must solve, which means it's now the responsibility of the business community to solve it. And notice how local governments aren't responsible to solve it, that everyday citizens aren't responsible to solve it, that kids and parents aren't responsible to solve it. It's businesses. So we make the focus of action and importance corporations. So where are all the systemic ecological relationships? They've been completely removed from the discourse by talking about carbon offsets and carbon markets. And by the way, this is a lot of money. The World Bank estimated $949 billion in the carbon markets in 2023 alone. Isn't that just a huge corporate rainfall of cash, of money going into capitalist markets to be sure that people can make money off of the destruction of the Earth's climate? So $949 billion is also a huge opportunity to skim some of that money into regenerative processes. And that's what we can try to do by changing the conversation. There's a huge, huge business opportunity, or there's a huge opportunity for finding funding by getting people to not put it into carbon markets and put it somewhere else instead. $949 billion in 2023 alone, and it's growing every year. So we need a better way of doing this. This carbon myopia, this reductionism, this market transactionalism, this anonymity, this is not the best way to deal with the most severe crisis that humanity's ever had to face, We need a better way of doing this. Luckily, we have one. I've been calling it the Better Than Carbon Offsets program, where relationships are what matters. And I posted this 2 days ago. This week, we learned that we received $8,000 from a socially conscious technology company in Germany that does sustainability reporting. They would rather give money to on-the-ground regenerative work they can see with their own eyes than put it into a carbon offset program that their employees don't trust to be making an impact. So what I want to share is, what are we doing differently in this program? How does it reframe the discourse and change the basic concepts for how we reason about how to deal with global warming? Why does this address all of the problems I mentioned above? Well, let's do it. Let's go and look at them. I'll walk through all of them step by step and you can see how it works. So first of all, just to give us a little context, many companies offer carbon offsets for the travel of their employees as a way to invest in the environment. You can calculate how much carbon emissions comes on an airline flight, and you can add those up for all of the flights your employees make. And then you could buy carbon offsets for that amount of carbon. And people do this all the time. But there are multiple problems with carbon offsets. So like, how do you know your offsets lead to real world impacts in terms of improved ecosystems and community resilience? So we have a solution for this, which is that conscientious companies can donate directly to our regenerative efforts here in Barichara. And you're going to see with the way we do it in Barichara that you could do this where you live as well. So they can donate directly to our regenerative efforts and see the results for themselves. Notice that this is a relationship solution to what has been treated as an economic problem. Rather than it being a, quote, market failure, so you create a market solution and then a market mechanism to deal with the economic problem, what if instead it's a problem of relationships? That the people who are emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere are not in relationship with the healers of the earth. And if they came into relationship, then as long as they continue to emit carbon through their activities, then they could at least work with those who are doing land healing and ecosystem restoration and these kinds of things and directly participate in that. And that would be a relationship solution. So the basic idea is this, is that employees who donate their carbon offsets to Regenerate Barichara and the work we're doing here are invited to track our progress. They can see what we're doing through a combination of social media reporting, like here on the right. These are blog posts that I put on the regeneratebarichara.org website. So you can just go and read my blog. There's regularly scheduled Barichara update sessions that we used to do and that we may start again if we start to have more interest, where we basically have update sessions that people can attend. People can visit us in Barichara. We just invited the German software company. We invited them to send staff to our Barichara design immersion in February. We'll see if any of them come. So basically they can donate money to what we're doing in Barichara instead of paying for carbon offsets, and they can watch what we do. And what's interesting about this is that we have multiple channels of communication because we have multiple initiatives in our bioregion. Here are just a few of them. These are screenshots from my phone of the Instagram channels for Casa Común, which does regenerative economics, Barichara Regenerativa, which is our territorial foundation, coordinating the regeneration of our territory, my personal Instagram channel, where I just post stories about what I'm doing, Sueños del Bosque, our regenerative school, Centropic Barichara, which is our centropic agroforestry work. So simply by following us on Instagram, we're continually sharing what we're doing across a diversity of regenerative initiatives. And so if someone's giving money to Barichara, we don't have to do any reporting. All they have to do is come and look at our regularly updated and continually shared content as we're telling our stories on a daily basis, which all of these projects are doing. So you see, social media is a beautiful hack on all of the costs of reporting and evaluation. You can just look and say, oh, there's a picture of kids planting trees. They planted trees today, and there was regenerative education going on. And you can see it in the pictures. So this is a human relationship way of doing reporting and evaluation. So I just want to stop for a second and pull back and notice something, which is that ecology is all about context and it's all about relationships, which means regenerative finance is a kind of ecology. And so That means we need finance that is about context and relationships, which carbon markets destroy context and they destroy relationships. The relationships don't matter. They actually design them so they don't need to matter. But what if we need them to matter so people will think ecologically? Then we need a different way of doing things entirely. And so here we have the problem of commodities. And the problem of commodities, what it does is it removes the context and it makes everything identical so it fits into a logic of mass production. 1 ton of carbon is equivalent to every other ton of carbon, and our entire market cares nothing at all about local context. All it cares is about how many tons of carbon are bought and sold, which is to remove all of ecological thinking from the understanding of what's happening, which is a pretty foolish way to deal with global warming. But a better way to do it is to enrich the context and cultivate the uniqueness of each place. Here's an example where my ex-wife, Jessica, is on the land Orihindalagua, which is a nature reserve, and she is adapting watershed restoration practices with reforestation techniques, with syntropic agroforestry techniques, using native plants. And in that building down behind her, there's a public school where they collaborate with the local kids. This is a unique local context with unique culture and ecology. And the way regeneration is done here is not the same as it'd be done anywhere else. So you translate the money for carbon offsets into paying for work at some place like Orihindalagua, and you're supporting the enrichment of a local context in the way that you're relating to the work that you're supporting. That's a much better way to do it than to remove context and commodify things. Similarly, if you look at the problem of market logic, which is to treat the situation as if it were a market transaction with a business solution. It's like how to earn money as a kid. Woohoo, if we're adolescent behaving people in our business world and we're destroying the Earth's biosphere, at least we could make money off of it. But wait, there's a better logic. What if we learn how to act in service to something bigger than ourselves, and then instead of acting on the motivation to make money? If we learn to act in service and care for the relationships, care for the things that we're in service to. Like here's my daughter caring for a coconut palm tree that we planted at our learning center, Totumo. So if we learn how to act in service to something bigger than ourselves, then we're moving away from that cold market logic and moving into intimacy of care, love, reverence, and dare I say, the sacred, which is fundamental to realigning human relationships with the rest of life on Earth. What about the problem of anonymity? See, by focusing on generic market transactions, we remove the personal human relationships. They're not only unnecessary, they get in the way of that market logic. But what if instead we get to know the people involved? Like here's my friend Ceci. Say hi, Ceci. What if there's a way for you to know who the people are doing the regenerative work that you support? And you could actually have a call with them. You could have them present to you. You could come and meet them in person by going to the place that you're supporting. This is a much more human way of relating to the regeneration of the Earth. And this problem of reductionism, which is basically we make simplifying assumptions so the math works. Any of you who have ever studied physics, and probably many of you have studied engineering will know this joke, that we assume that a horse or a cow is shaped like a sphere to make the math easier. Like I can calculate the thermodynamics of a cow by assuming it's shaped like a sphere because it makes the math is easier to do. And this is basically what we've done with neoclassical economics. We assume everything's at equilibrium. We assume that all prices have achieved equilibrium. We make all these simplifying assumptions about the math that are completely unrealistic. And with that simplifying mathematics, we force the world to behave like our stupid mathematics. But what if instead we embrace complexity and learn how the world actually works? What if we take the time to see that there's this web of interdependent relationships and there is no reducing them to simple mathematics? That we actually have to become intimate with these webs of relationships to be stewards and guardians and active participants in the healing of the Earth. Now, this is definitely a better way to do it than to reduce things and become anonymous and to commodify things. And then what about this problem of carbon myopia, where we pretend, we fake, we lie to ourselves that the problem is how much CO2 is in the atmosphere? It's like we've gotten rid of the entire biosphere, we've gotten rid of all living systems, and we're treating the world like this cup of carbonated water, right? Here's this carbonated water, and we're counting how much carbonation is in it. But that's not actually what matters. What actually matters is that we have to learn how to regenerate ecology and culture in holistic ways. And here in Badichara, we're focusing on regeneration of natural ecosystems, regenerative economics, regenerative education, regeneration of culture, territorial healing processes, bioregional learning centers, all kinds of rich, holistic ecological and cultural elements to come into deep relationship with the land that we steward and with the places where we live, which is the relational element of why we're damaging the biosphere in the first place, is that we came out of right relationship and we need to come back into right relationship to be able to heal. So you can see this through the way that we've been developing our regenerative education fund, which is just a subset of all this work. We have all these different regenerative initiatives, right? And when we receive money in Badichara, it goes into a tapestry of local regenerative initiatives. How does that happen? Well, because we've already been doing our bioregional organizing, because we've organized locally through the territorial foundation called Badichara Regenerativa. And in that territorial foundation, we have a regenerative education fund, and we're already collaborating with multiple educational initiatives. So someone who brings money for regenerative education is supporting an ecosystem of education. And each regenerative effort in this ecosystem, like I showed you in those Instagram channels, each one has its own team and its own communication channels. So they're all reporting for themselves. Notice how this is like a living system where every one of your cells can send signals to other cells in the body. It's decentralized across the territory. So we have a living web of regenerative culture that's organizing itself at a bioregional scale. And when someone puts their money in this, instead of in carbon offsets, they're actually building the transition pathway to regenerative economies. Whereas carbon markets keep you trapped in the logic of neoliberal capitalism, and you can't leave that logic without leaving that logic. You can't leave that system based on that logic without leaving the logic behind. And so another way of saying it is, you don't just give money to pay for tons of carbon, you invite people into your territory and into a web of ecological, cultural, and deeply human relationships. And if you do this, you've moved beyond carbon offsets and you're flowing value into human relationships that are acting in service to the earth. So you see how by understanding the key framing problems of carbon markets and that neoliberal capitalist approach to global warming, and recognizing that we have to start from a living systems lens. As Fritjof Capra would say, we have to start with an ecological worldview. From an ecological worldview, we would approach things very differently. We would say, let's build meaningful human relationships. Let's connect them to ecological webs of activity. Let's avoid being reductionistic. Like to ask how much carbon dioxide is offset by building conscience in children. It's a silly question. It's a silly question because those children are going to generate as much carbon offsets as they need to for their own landscape to be healthy, right? Like they'll just plant more trees and restore more rivers and do whatever they need if they're in a relationship of stewardship and care. So you're cultivating a developmental pathway away from the logic that's destroying the planet and toward one that actually can heal it. And so the beauty of us we now have two companies. They're both German companies. They're both sustainability oriented. And they both approached us without us asking and said, could we donate our carbon offsets to Badichara instead of a carbon offset program? And I was like, hell yes. And then we realized this is actually a story we could all tell. We could all be like, hey, my friend who works for a small to medium-sized business, I got 50 employees or 200 employees. Maybe instead of doing carbon offsets, you should fund our bioregional regeneration fund for our territory. And we'll connect you to all of the living web of activities, and you can participate in, you become a participant in the community. And what a much better value proposition, strictly from a business point of view. My business friends here in the room, isn't this like a good pitch? Like you could see, we could polish it, we could polish the pitch, but to say, oh, why don't you put your money into human relationships, children, forests, rivers, all of it at once, with trusted relationships with stewards at various scales. You don't have to pay any more money and you're invited to come play with us. Or put your money into an anonymous slot machine, pull the lever, and hope that you get a jackpot because you don't actually see any of how the machine works. And it changes the whole damn thing. And so that's why I feel like we can hack into that $949 billion. That's why I feel like we really can do this. We just start to tell people, look, there's a better way. If you talk to someone who's not quite sure carbon offsets are a good idea, you're like, well, I've got an idea for you. What if you give it to one of these bioregional regeneration projects? Why don't you support them in what they're doing and come into relationship with them? And usually it'll be modest amounts of money. We were given an $8,000 donation and a $1,300 donation by these two companies. And you know what? It's a game changer at the stage of our development. Total game changer. But what if we had 20 of those companies? Then we'd be generating $100,000 or more per year, and their employees could come for retreats. They could donate personally. They could send their friends to us. We've just got a network of promoters to promote what we're doing. And so we actually have an economic dynamic that can grow based on it being grounded in right relationships.